You think a badge gives you the right to put your hands on me? Camille Ward's voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It came out flat and even, which was somehow more frightening than if she had screamed. Deputy Dale Kowalski's lip curled. His hand, sliding toward the steel baton, clipped to his belt. I run this room. Sweetheart, you're just another mouth I can shut. Get on your knees before I put you there myself. He came at her fast, certain of an easy win. Certain he was about to teach a lesson, in respect. He had no idea he was about to put his hands on a trained Marine raider who had spent a decade hunting men far more dangerous than himself. In under 5 seconds, the man hunting her would become the one being hunted. The Larkspur County District Courthouse smelled like burnt coffee, old paper, and the particular metallic tang of nervous sweat that seeped into the wooden benches, no matter how many times the cleaning crew mopped the floors. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, casting a sickly light that made everyone in the gallery look a little grey, a little smaller than they actually were. For most people who walked through those oak doors, the room did exactly what it was designed to do. It stripped away their confidence and reminded them, in 100 small architectural ways, that they were not the ones in control here. Camille Ward was not most people. She sat in the 3rd row from the back, dressed in a deep burgundy zip-up hoodie, charcoal cargo pants, and a pair of broken-in suede combat boots that had crossed terrain most people in that courtroom would never be able to find on a map. Her posture was loose but never careless, the kind of relax that comes from years of being trained to spring into motion without a half-second of warning. Her eyes moved constantly, sweeping the room the way she had been taught to clear a building exits first, blind spots second, threats third. She wasn't being paranoid. She simply couldn't turn it off anymore. 2 visible exits. 1 blind corner behind the clerk's station. A judge's bench with bad sightlines to the gallery's east wall. It was automatic. The way some people automatically notice if a shirt doesn't match. She wasn't there for herself. She was there for her nephew, Eli Ward, a 21-year-old college junior who had been handed an unsafe lane change citation that anyone with eyes could see was bogus, a ticket written by an officer who had taken one look at the color of Eli's skin, the make of his car, and decided he'd found himself an easy target. Camille had used 2 days of leave specifically to sit beside him while he fought it. Camille was a Marine raider, a critical skills operator with Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command, one of a small number of women to make it through the brutal selection and training pipeline at the schoolhouse in eastern North Carolina, where candidates were broken down physically and mentally until only the ones who refused to quit were left standing. For 11 years she had operated in places whose names never made the news, conducting direct action raids and close quarters, work alongside the Raider battalions, the modern descendants of the legendary World War II unit that history books barely mentioned anymore. She had heard rounds crack past her head close enough to feel the pressure wave. She had felt the floor shake under a breaching charge. A county courthouse, by comparison, was barely a hiccup, but there was a different kind of danger in this building. One wrapped in a uniform and a badge instead of body armor. Standing near the low wooden gate that separated the gallery from the bench was Deputy Dale Kowalski. Kowalski wore his authority the way some men wear a grudge visibly, constantly, looking for any excuse to use it. He was a 24-year veteran of the county sheriff's department, broad and heavy, at roughly 270 pounds, with a face permanently flushed from a mix of high blood pressure and an ego that bruised easily. He'd been quietly shuffled into courthouse security duty years earlier, after a long string of excessive force complaints that the department had buried rather than dealt with. Nobody wanted the headache of firing him. It was easier to just move him somewhere with less exposure. From the second Camille and Eli had walked through the metal detectors that morning, Kowalski had been watching them, not the way a security officer watches a crowd, but the way a predator watches something it has already decided, his prey. To him, the young black man in the carefully buttoned shirt and the athletic black woman in the hoodie weren't citizens waiting their turn. They were an opportunity. Look at the two of them. Kowalski muttered to a younger deputy standing near the wall, hitching up his duty belt so the gear rattled for effect. Strolling in here like they own the place. No respect. The younger deputy, a guy named Park, who'd only been on the job a year, said nothing and looked at the floor. Kowalski didn't need an audience to enjoy himself. He fed on the discomfort all by himself. Throughout the long morning, Kowalski made a point of walking past their bench again and again, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm every time he passed, making sure they noticed it. At one point he let the head of his baton accidentally clip Eli's knee. "Watch yourself," he said with a mocking half-smile. "Wouldn't want you tripping over the law." Eli's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on his lap. Camille reached over and rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Breathe," she murmured. "He wants a reaction. Don't give him one." Through all of it, Camille's pulse never climbed. She had survived interrogation drills designed to break people, had been hunted across freezing terrain during training exercises, meant to push recruits past what they believed were the limits of the human body. A bitter man with a badge and a grudge wasn't a threat. He was background noise. By the early afternoon, though, Kowalski's irritation had curdled into something uglier. Camille's total lack of fear unsettled him in a way he couldn't articulate and couldn't tolerate. In his mind, people who looked like her were supposed to flinch. They were supposed to look away. He decided she needed reminding of her place. A doi patruzeci și cinci pări. M. Judge Calloway banged his gavel and announced a short recess to review paperwork in chambers. The courtroom exhaled. Lawyers shuffled files. A few people stood to stretch. Eli got up to find the restroom, grateful for a moment away from Kowalski's glare. Camille stayed seated, pulling out her phone to check an encrypted message about an upcoming training rotation. Kowalski saw his opening. With the judge gone, the room belonged to him. He crossed the floor with heavy, deliberate steps, stopping directly in front of Camille and leaning into her space. "Hey, you." No phones in the gallery. He pointed at a sign near the door. The sign says silenced. "Not put away," Camille said evenly, locking the screen and sliding it into her pocket without breaking eye contact. "Is there a problem?" "Deputy, your attitude is the problem." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into something meant to feel intimate and menacing at once. "I know exactly what you are. Coming in here dressed like that. Acting like the rules don't apply to you." Camille didn't react to the insult buried in his tone. Instead, she read him the way she would read, a hostile in a doorway, pulse visibly hammering in his neck. Pupils blown wide. Weight shifted forward onto his toes. He wasn't trying to de-escalate. He was hunting for a reason to put his hands on her. "I'm following the rules." "Deputy." I'm sitting quietly, waiting for my nephew's case to be called. "Step back. You're in my space." Something in Kowalski's face cracked at that. A woman telling him to back off. Calmly. In front of witnesses, it was more than his pride could absorb. "I'll stand wherever I want," he snapped, loud enough that heads turned across the gallery. "Get up. You're leaving." "On what grounds?" Camille asked, her voice shifting into something sharper, not panic. "But commande, because I said so. You're disturbing the peace." His voice cracked the high ceiling, drawing more eyes. More phones quietly rising into recording position. "I am not disturbing anything," Camille said. "You're escalating something that doesn't need to be escalated. I'd suggest you walk away." It was a real warning. A last one. But Kowalski had spent 24 years never being told no by someone who looked like her. And he wasn't capable of recognizing the door she'd just opened for him. "That's it," he growled, lunging forward with both hands to grab the front of her hoodie, intending to haul her off the bench and slam her down. It was the worst decision of his career. For Camille, the moment didn't move at the panicked speed, it moved for him. Years of repetition had rewired how her body processed danger. His attack telegraphed itself in every clumsy detail: the overcommitted lean, the flared elbow, the obvious shift of weight onto his front foot. There was no panic in her, no flood of adrenaline scrambling her thoughts. Just geometry, just leverage. The instant his hands closed on the fabric of her hoodie, she moved, not away from him, which was what he expected, but into him, collapsing the distance he needed to control her. Her left hand snapped up and locked around his wrist in an iron grip, while the heel of her right hand drove into the nerve cluster on the inside of his elbow. Folding his arm at an angle, it was never built to bend. He grunted, confused, his brain unable to process why his momentum had simply vanished. Before he could recover, Camille pivoted, hooking her leg behind his and sweeping it out from under him in a clean throw she'd drilled hundreds of times on training mats. His 270 pounds left the ground entirely for one disorienting half-second before gravity reclaimed him. He hit the courtroom floor with a crash loud enough to shake the bolted-down benches. The air left his lungs in a wet, ragged gasp. She wasn't finished. A man on the ground with a loaded weapon on his hip was still dangerous. She dropped her weight onto his back, driving a knee between his shoulder blades and wrenching his trapped arm into a lock that hovered millimeters from snapping the joint. With her free hand, she slammed the heel of her palm down on the retention strap of his holster, sealing his weapon in place, then stripped the baton from its pouch and sent it sliding across the floor. Well out of reach, the entire sequence from the moment he grabbed her hoodie to the moment he lay pinned and gasping took less than 5 seconds. The courtroom went dead, silent. No one moved. The only sound was Kowalski's strained, humiliated wheezing against the floor. "Don't move," Camille said, her voice calm and absolute. "If you reach for that weapon, I will break your arm before you finish the motion. Do you understand me? Get off me." Kowalski hokered out, his face mashed against the tile. "Assault on an officer. You initiated unlawful physical contact," Camille said, clear and steady, fully aware that several phones in the gallery were capturing every word. "I executed a proportionate defensive response. Stay down." The double doors at the back of the room burst open. 3 more deputies rushed in, hands flying to their tasers at the impossible sight of their senior colleague pinned by a single unarmed woman. "Hands up, get off him," the lead deputy shouted, aiming dual red laser dots at Camille's chest. She knew exactly how fast situations like this turned fatal, especially for a black civilian surrounded by panicked officers with their hands on weapons. She released Kowalski instantly, rose, and raised both palms high and open. "I'm unarmed," she said, voice ringing clear and level through the chaos. "I am fully complying. The officer on the ground initiated an unprovoked assault against me. I acted in self-defense." Kowalski scrambled upright, clutching his shoulder, his uniform filthy, his face a furious, mottled red. Public humiliation in front of a recording gallery lit something vicious in him. "She attacked me," he bellowed, jabbing a thick finger toward her. "Came at me like an animal resisting. Assaulting an officer. Cuff her now." The younger deputies hesitated, glancing between the calm, composed woman with her hands raised and their disheveled, screaming senior officer. The visual didn't match the story, but rank one out. 2 of them moved forward and pulled Camille's arms behind her back. She offered no resistance, letting the cuffs click shut around her wrists. She knew exactly how this would play out. She just had to let him keep talking, just as Kowalski drew breath for another round of accusations. The door behind the bench swung open, and Judge Calloway strode out in his black robes. Drawn by the crash and the shouting, "What in God's name is happening in my courtroom?" His eyes swept the scene, overturned chairs, a dozen raised phones, his filthy, panting deputy, and the handcuffed woman standing perfectly composed in the center aisle. "Your Honor," Kowalski said quickly, switching instantly into a wounded performance. Clutching his arm, this woman became violent and aggressive. I asked her to step outside, and she attacked me, unprovoked. "She's dangerous." Judge Calloway's eyes narrowed on Camille. He didn't see a violent woman. He saw someone standing at attention despite being restrained. "Is that true?" he asked her directly. "Did you strike my deputy?" "No." "Your Honor," Camille said, holding his gaze without flinching. "It's a fabrication. Deputy Kowalski has harassed me since I entered this building. He invaded my personal space and then grabbed me, intending to throw me to the floor. I used a standard defensive technique to protect myself. Nothing more." "She's lying," Kowalski snapped, emboldened by the sight of her in cuffs. "She's a violent liar." "Judge, lock her up. I am not violent." "Deputy," Camille said, her voice dropping a register, calm, but with an edge that made the hair on Deputy Park's arms stand up. She turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, my name is Staff Sergeant Camille Ward. I am an active duty critical skills operator with Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. I strongly suggest you pull the courthouse's security footage before this man commits perjury in front of you." The room went silent again. Marine Raider hung in the air like something with weight. The smug confidence drained out of Kowalski's face, replaced by a sickly pallor. His eyes flicked nervously to the camera domes in the ceiling corners. Judge Calloway's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "You're an active duty Marine Special Operator." "Staff Sergeant Ward." "Yes." "Your Honor, I'm here on approved leave, supporting my nephew with a citation." She nodded toward Eli, who had just returned, wide-eyed at the scene. "And as someone trained extensively in close quarters threat neutralization, I can assure you that if I'd intended to seriously injure Deputy Kowalski, he would not currently be standing here lying to you about it." A few quiet, disbelieving laughs rippled through the gallery. Kowalski looked like he might be sick. "Deputy Voss," the judge snapped, turning to a young officer hovering near the wall. "Go to the security office. Pull the unedited footage from the gallery camera. Bring it to my bench. Now." "Yes." "Your Honor." Voss sprinted out, visibly relieved to have a reason to leave the room. The next several minutes were agonizing for Kowalski. He stood sweating near the bailiff's desk, his mind racing through excuses he knew wouldn't survive. Contact with high-definition video. He considered claiming he'd felt threatened. He knew the camera had audio. He was cornered by his own actions. When Voss returned with a tablet, Judge Calloway tapped the screen, and the small speaker filled the silent room with footage that left no room for doubt. Kowalski leaning in, whispering his contempt, then lunging at a seated, unmoving woman. The defensive takedown played out in crisp, undeniable detail. The judge set the tablet down with a sharp clack. "Remove the handcuffs from Staff Sergeant Ward." "Now." The deputy fumbled the key loose. Camille brought her arms forward, rubbing her wrists, never breaking eye contact with Kowalski. "Deputy Kowalski," Judge Calloway said, his voice cold with fury. "I have tolerated your temperament in this courtroom longer than I should have, but this is assault under color of law. And you just lied to my face on camera, trying to frame an innocent woman to cover for it. Deputy Voss, strip him of his weapon and his badge. Read him his rights. He's under arrest." The sound of Kowalski's own handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the room like a verdict in itself. The man who had spent 2 decades bullying people from behind a badge stood there, stripped of all of it, Finally, on the wrong end of the power he'd abused for so long. Camille didn't gloat. She gave him one slow, final nod, the kind a soldier gives a defeated opponent before turning away for good, and walked over to check on Eli. Within 48 hours, footage from the courthouse camera and half a dozen cell phones had leaked online and gone viral worldwide. The image of a calm, controlled Marine raider dismantling a corrupt officer in under 5 seconds resonated globally. The sheriff's department, scrambling to contain the fallout, fired Kowalski and stripped his pension before the week was out. But that was only the beginning of the consequences. Because Camille was active-duty military, and the assault had been so blatant and clearly motivated by prejudice, the Department of Justice opened a federal civil rights investigation. Kowalski wasn't just looking at local assault charges anymore. He was indicted under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. A federal charge carrying serious mandatory penalties. At his trial 8 months later, Camille's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Owen Brackett, sat in the front row of the gallery in full-dress uniform, decorations on his chest, glaring steadily at the defense table for the entire proceeding. The jury deliberated for under 90 minutes before returning a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, citing Kowalski's long, buried history of complaints and his attempt to frame an innocent woman to escape accountability, showed no leniency. Kowalski was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Camille wasn't in the country to hear the verdict read. She was somewhere far from cameras and courtrooms, deployed on an operation she would never be able to talk about, doing exactly what she had trained her entire adult life to do. She wasn't thinking about Dale Kowalski. She had already left him behind, filed away with everything else that no longer mattered. Once the mission in front of her began, he would spend the next 5 years in a small concrete cell, stripped of his badge, his pension, and the only kind of power he'd ever known how to use, haunted, more than anything, by the memory of exactly how little time it had taken a quiet professional to take it all away from him.